I said it before and I'll say it again, Americans and small cars have always been a rocky relationship. Sure, American car makers have made small cars in the past, but these were either not really all that good or simply not small enough to really compete with what the rest of the world thinks is a small car. But one company stepped in not to design a compact car, not even a small car, but a straight up microcar. The smallest of the smallest. Welcome everyone to episode 83 of the Automotive History series, where we micromanage the rise and fall of General Motors' one and only microcar, the Cadet. Designing a car is hard work, especially in the USA back in the 1950s and 60s. Sketching, sculpting, drawing, designing. If you think that the day is done when the final design proposal of a new car is approved, think again. Because this car enters production now, but already needs a facelift for the next year. Or maybe you're trying to wrap your head around that particular design proposal and how you can't seem to properly get it on a car. Or maybe you keep mulling over the font type that is the best for the badge design that you've been working on. But during the rare moments business is a little slow, there was also room to play. Besides the, well, let's call it homework, coming into office every day and work on the bread and butter regular passenger cars, car designers and stylists were challenged to come up with new out-of-the-box ideas and designs. Sure, these designs most likely would never come to life, but who knows? Maybe some creative ideas and explorations may trickle down on regular production cars for the coming years. Enter designer Pete Brock, among the youngest of designers ever to start working at General Motors. The story goes that during one evening when he worked on some sketches, he was paid a surprise visit by the big boss of the styling department, Harley Earl. And for the record, this man, Harley Earl, was in fact a big boss. During his career, he practically invented car styling in its many aspects and was considered a dictatorial and authoritative figure within the walls of the GM styling studio. You never spoke to Earl, he would only speak to you when you either did something really good or really bad. So you can imagine Pete's surprise that Harley looked over his shoulder that evening and asked him what his thoughts were on GM's latest lineup of cars. Pete admitted that the current cars weren't bad at all, but he personally missed the presence of a small car. Or, as he called it, a student car. Just a small, fun runabout with a very low retail price specifically targeted at students as they either couldn't afford a regular car or were stuck driving the dad's dull four-door waterbeds on wheels. Now, does the concept of a small and hip car for young folks remind you of something? Anyway, Pete also added that this car could be as small as one of those microcars that were just getting popular in Europe. Not to mention the growing influx of small but regular European cars coming into the USA in the past few years. Now, to backtalk the big boss, that was seemingly stupid, but instead, Harley Earl took it the right way. He liked the idea of exploring an ultra-small car and said to Pete, "You are going to figure this one out. From now on, this is going to be your project, your sketches, your designs. Surprise me." Under the watchful eye of Earl, Pete went to work to give his ideas of a micro-student car some shape. Pete was enamored by the European microcars such as the Isetta, and Earl was particularly enamored by the Volkswagen Karmann Ghia sports car that had just come out a few years before. The Karmann wasn't particularly small, but still compact by American standards. So the car has to be as small as an Isetta, as sporty and good-looking as the Karmann, and have a few traces of typical GM pizzazz in its styling. And here are some quick and dirty earliest sketches. It looks like a small pocket rocket that's a two-seater with fastback styling. The sketches were approved by the styling studio and Earl greenlit the project to be set in stone. Clay. Usually when the sketches are promising, it was time to transfer the ideas from 2D sketches to 3D clay modeling. And here you see the design proposal in clay, which gives you a much better understanding of the size, surfacing, and proportions. Especially when this man is in the picture, which I believe is Pete Brock. It truly shows how small and low this car is. So, what do we see? we see an extremely small car, especially by American standard. The thing with very small cars is that they're bound to have odd proportions, mostly dictated by the size of the wheels and, most importantly, the interior space. You make a car as small as you like, but you still need to be able to enter and exit the car with some ease and not saw both your legs off in order to be able to sit in it. And so you get cars like the Isetta, which looks space-age but also a bit funky with its one-box design. And yet this proposal looks stunning. Somehow the car features the same proportions as the bigger American cars, just on a smaller scale. It has that longer, wider, lower look so common with American cars at the time. And it has a 3-box design with a pronounced hood, somewhat of a pronounced trunk, and so much room in the midsection that even a fastback roof is possible. The only thing that makes it look a bit like a toy car is that the wheels are just a bit too big. But hey, even then, good job! Here you see the comparison with some of the cars I mentioned earlier. Here the clay model is compared to the Isetta. The wheelbase is slightly longer than that of an Isetta, which has a wheelbase of just over 1.5 meters or 59 inches. The clay model has a wheelbase of 63 inches or 1 meters and 60 centimeters. Also, the overall length is not given but slightly longer than the Isetta, and yet the car is still lower. How low can you go? And here's a comparison with a standard American car, a 1957 Chevrolet that was just in production at the time. The top of the roof of the clay car barely towers over the hood of the Chevy, and the wheelbase of the clay car, if not its entire length, fits snugly in the wheelbase of the Chevy. The last picture shows a comparison between the two cars this clay car was based on. The looks of the Karmann Ghia combined with the size of the Isetta. The car truly bridges the gap between the two other cars. The clay car proposal once again received praise within the styling department, and the development of the next phase began. Up until this point, the car was internally designated as the XP-79, but was quickly nicknamed the Cadet. And I hear you think, Edward, haven't you talked about a similar car before? Wasn't there also a Chevrolet Cadet? And you're right. In an earlier video, I talked about another experimental small car about 10 years earlier. During the Second World War, all car production had stopped because of the war effort, and people weren't exactly sure how long the war would last. So GM explored the idea of something of a crisis car, a small, simple, easy-to-maintain car to keep the USA on the move during the war. But as soon as the war ended, the project was scrapped. But the name Cadet then hovered around the hallways and the rooms at the styling studio as a nickname for any small car project. Here the process began to make another replica of the clay concept, but this time made out of fiberglass so that it became a true representation of what a final production car would look like. This also includes an idea of the interior styling and the addition of glass, as well as ideas of what is hidden underneath, like what engine was going to be used, the transmission, the suspension, etc. To get there, a wooden skeleton frame was developed to get an idea how the passengers would sit inside the car and if it was feasible, given its very small dimensions. From there, the fiberglass Cadet was built. The front end doesn't feature a typical grille as the car was rear-engined. Instead, you can see it takes a heavy dose of inspiration from the Karmann Ghia. Officially, bigger bumpers were required, but that would destroy its good looks. For now, small bumperettes were installed. Styling-wise, it kinda looks like something of a Fiat 8V sports car that had shrunk in the wash, especially when you compare the very pointy front fenders curving towards the headlights. And there was also traces of Chevrolet in the design, especially the rear end kinda looks like a Corvette as well as a touch of a Corvair. The Corvette styling is no surprise. Pete Brock later was involved with the styling of the C2 Corvette, as well as a few concept cars revolving around the C2. And so the styling themes that were put on the Corvette were first explored by this car. The interior is, as expected, the bare minimum. You get a speedometer and a gas gauge, and that's it. In order to expand the interior space, regular window cranks were replaced by these buttons you see on the door, which you pull or push to drag the window up or down. Surprisingly, in the middle we find the controls of an automatic transmission. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a placeholder, as a regular automatic transmission from GM would never fit in this car. Instead, there were ideas to use an infinitely variable hydraulic unit, so something of an early version of a CVT. The transmission was coupled to a rear-mounted engine, which in this case wasn't a big and burbling V8, but a small 2-cylinder air-cooled engine. Still, that's double the cylinders of an Isetta. The fiberglass Cadet concept was almost ready for the big day, showing it to GM's top brass to get final approval and enter production. Because up until this point, all work that was done on the prototype was essentially for nothing. No single confirmation was given that this car would ever enter production. So in order to give a solid presentation, a little sister was created as well, a panel van version that shows that this car could also be used for light commercial use, like florists, pharmacists, and the like. The fiberglass Cadet was shown to the highest layers of GM's management and was met with negative reviews. As much as Pete, Harley, the stylist, and other managers of the styling studio liked it, those with the final command didn't like it. I mean, come on, if you park this fella between beasts that look like this, and this, and this, then sure enough it'll stick out like a sore thumb. The story goes that one of the executives even refused to look at it. The general consensus was GM doesn't build small cars. And with that, the story of what could have been America's one and only microcar ended. But let's analyze this a bit more for a second, shall we? It's easy to just say that in the name of holy profit margins and the overall fear Americans seem to have for small cars is what killed the project. But what is the added value of an all-American microcar? What is the added value of the Cadet? The reason why microcars were popular in Europe in the 1950s was mostly out of necessity. In the rebuilding years after the war, when you needed transportation at the lowest cost possible, you bought a microcar or a bike. But this craze was only temporary as soon as the various people cars were released and most European countries experienced a post-war economic boom in the 60s. Those who had a microcar traded up for a people's car, still small but quite an upgrade over a microcar. Now, the US never needed to rebuild and gas was cheap. Sure, they could do with a car smaller than a full-size car at the time, but not microcar small. If you want proof, take a look at the Crossley cars from 10 years before. And even if GM did put it in production, I couldn't think of any reason why it would make sense. So is it just to show off that whatever GM does, it does best? That creating a car they have otherwise no experience with whatsoever was just another field day? And who did they want to sell it to? Americans? Only students? That seems like a very narrow market segment. Or did they want to export the car to Europe? Because that would be too late. By the time this microcar reached the European shores, Europe had moved on to Beetles, 2CVs and Minis. And why would the American styling department of GM try to reinvent the wheel, when GM could have asked its European subsidiaries, like the British Vauxhall and German Opel, for help? After all, these companies had a lot more experience creating small cars than Detroit. But maybe there was also some competition within the walls of the styling department, the Corvair. When I matched the dates written on the photos of the styling exercise of the Cadet and the Corvair, I think it's safe to say that both cars were developed around the same time, and that the Cadet was inspired by the Corvair or the other way around. You certainly see a little resemblance in the styling of the rear ends of both cars. In any way, GM was already working on a smaller than full-size car, where it probably turned out through market research that a microcar was a huge gamble, but a compact car a little less so. The economic recession of 1958 and the growing popularity of the Volkswagen Beetle in particular showed that Americans were interested in something smaller, not micro, just compact. And so the decision was final. the Cadet was scrapped. It was a great little experiment on what could have been, but all bets were placed on the Corvair and its compact sisters over the Buick, Oldsmobile and Pontiac. A car that preserved traditional American car values, only in a slightly smaller package. If you wish to know more about the experimental Cadet car from 10 years earlier, click the video in the top left. If you wish to know more about the microcar craze of the 1950s in Europe, click the video in the bottom left.